Yo, what's up, guys? Teacher Paul here, and today we have a coffee request. It's not a buy me coffee request. It's actually a coffee KOFI request. So thank you so much for this coffee request. Um, we don't get a lot of coffee requests. We get buy me a coffee requests. So really cool. So if you, for some reason, have issues with the website Buy Me a Coffee, go over to the website KOFI. Teacher Paul Reacts. Link is in the pinned comments. If one doesn't work, the other one will work. Anyways, this is from Klaus, who says, HAKKA PÄLLE, Gustavian Cavalry, the army of Gustavus Adolphus by Styrman on YouTube. So we're going to check this out. Thank you so much for this request. And this is apparently, is this Swedish history or Norwegian history? Or Finnish history? Let me know in the chat. We're live right now. I feel like it's Finnish. Is it? Finnish, Swedish. Okay. No, yeah. Remember Kai? Let's go. Let's check it out, guys. And if you want to see this without my commentary, without my reaction to it, then go to the link which is in the description. Let's go.
Since the fall of the Roman Empire, good riddance by the way, cavalry had dominated the European battlefield. Owning a horse was expensive, and learning how to effectively command it in battle required time which only the aristocracy could afford. Medieval battles were decided by the thundering charges of heavily armed knights. That was until the infantry revolution. In the 14 and 1500s, princes started to raise professional infantry units armed with pikes. They were able to fend off the cavalry charges. The introduction of gunpowder allowed for weaponry that could pierce the knight's metal armor.
Yeah, so I saw someone on YouTube also talk about this. Actually, I think it was Zach D Films. It was mentioned that these armors, they were very good to stop and absorb impact from knives, but not even close to, stopping a bullet. Not even close. So it wouldn't help at all. Whoever invented the gun had a big advantage in war.
However, cavalry was far away from obsolete. That wouldn't happen until the advent of machine guns in the early 1900s.
Dang. Have you ever watched The Last Samurai?
Germany and Poland, heavy cavalry would run down and discipline infantry, like the scythe does chaff.
Hi, Ram.
During the 30 Years' War, imperial cuirassiers would sway battles in the Catholic favor under legendary commanders like Pappenheim.
And now that's something I have actually never seen. It makes a lot of sense. The transition. That makes a lot of sense. Did this actually used to be a thing? A horseman, a knight with a shotgun, or like that looks like a sawed-off shotgun. But that looks like it could have been a thing. A knight with a shotgun, that's because the transition area. Obviously, I've seen people on horses with guns, Braveheart. But you know what I'm saying?
Matters like Pappenheim. In this famous
Thank you.
painting,
Have you never seen Lizzie, my dog? Guys, we're live right now, so come join us.
Depicting the Battle of Kirkholm, we see the Polish hussars steaming over the poorly trained Swedish army. Only 2,600 hussars managed to massacre an army of 8,000 infantrymen and 2,500 horsemen. The Nordic countries lacked the cavalry traditions of continental Europe. The peasantry were free and strong, whereas the nobility were weak, poor, and few in numbers.
Why? Is it because your horses are like different? You have very different horse breeds.
Horse wants grass and open fields, but the Nordic terrain consists mostly of mountains and forest.
That makes sense. What about goats?
Neither had the cold climate developed any impressive breeds of horse.
Kidding.
Imperial General Tilly mocked them for their small size.
Yeah, that's what I was asking.
Writer wrote apologetically of the.
I feel sorry for them.
General Tilly mocked them for their small size.
Don't mock them for their size.
One anonymous writer wrote apologetically of the Swedish horses, saying, "In truth, they are very stout. In consideration of their low stature, exceedingly strong."
Nordic horses are amazing. They're so cute.
By 1600, European cavalry was divided into two types, cuirassiers and arquebusiers. Cuirassiers were heavy cavalry, kitted out in almost bulletproof armor, and charged into battle with a pair of pistols. Arquebusiers were skirmisher cavalry, armed with a short firearm, the arquebus, sometimes called a carbine. The role of the arquebusier was to support the flanks of the cuirassiers, softening up the enemy before a charge. Dragoons were seen as mounted infantry, and lancers had been abandoned by everyone except the Polish.
Those were the first ones to die, though. When
Gustavus Adolphus became king, he had been left with a very bad army. If he wanted to beat up the Poles and their hussars, he needed a much better cavalry force. By the time he began his sweeping military reforms, his only permanent cuirassier unit were the Adelsfana, noble banner, composed of feudal knights. Weirdly enough, they were hardly ever called upon in wartime. The rest of Sweden's native cavalry were poorly equipped arquebusiers. Sweden's contemporary industry struggled at kitting them out with guns and armor. Since Gustavus couldn't get enough arquebuses, he decided to just throw them away. Since he didn't
just
have
throw them away?
There was no point having arquebusiers, whose tactical purpose was to support the cuirassiers.
What about selling them?
After 1621, his cavalry was supplied only with a pair of pistols and a sword, a back and a breastplate, and an open-faced helmet. The new helmet allowed the cavalryman not only to see better, but also to drink a cold beverage of his choice. Previously, some cuirassiers had a hole in their visor, in which to stick a plastic straw. Gustavus had reverted his cavalry to the light horsemen, which had been prevalent in northern Germany during the 1500s. The light horseman was an all-purpose cavalryman. He could carry out both shock attacks and campaign duties. Swedish cavalrymen were divided into regiments, the same way as the infantry, and their campaign battalions consisted of 564 men. 100 of these performed campaign duties, such as guarding the camp or performing reconnaissance. But whilst the light horseman was a jack of all trades, he didn't excel in any field. Indeed, the Gustavian Cavalry lacked a distinct purpose, and observers weren't sure what to call them. Some called them cuirassiers, since they carried armor and pistols. The English called them arquebusiers. Eventually, the term Reiter became the most popular. That just means rider in German. Whilst native Swedish infantry were conscripted, the native horsemen consisted primarily...
I mean, carrying heavy material, that's a big advantage when you have cavalry. But it's interesting, whenever I play the, Age of Empire types of games, cavalry, they are very useful as a charged attack, but it's not very good defensively. And I know that you can't trust these games for strategic, real war strategy, but I feel like it's not as efficient as the melee, the soldiers. You know what I'm saying? I don't know why.
Was native Swedish infantry
I like archers too.
The native horsemen consisted primarily of volunteers. These volunteers were social climbers from a rising group of well-off farmers who had combined their farm work with services to the state, such as tax collectors, sheriffs, and innkeepers. Some of these farmers banded together to supply the crown with a cavalryman, a horse, and equipment. In the 1680s, the system became known as Indelningsverket, the allotment system, and would be implemented as the recruitment system for the entirety of the Swedish army. Anyway, volunteering as a cavalryman was popular, because you had risked being conscripted as an infantryman anyway. Being a cavalryman seems to have been safer. Whilst most Swedish infantrymen never returned home, half of the national cavalrymen that served in the 30 Years' War returned to Sweden safely.
Wow,
For the rich farmers, it was a game of hazard. If they survived, they could return home with considerable plunder to improve their economic standing. One of the most unique units of Gustavus' army were a company of mounted jägers called djurskyttar, game shooters. They are one of the first jäger units ever recorded. They were established as early as 1611 and served throughout Gustavus' reign. They were recruited from the foresters and game wardens of southern Sweden's royal estates, and each man provided himself with a horse. They were armed with hunting guns called fågelbössor, fowling pieces, made in Småland. They had a small bore of 8 to 10 millimeters, whereas the typical musket had 19 millimeters. However, the fowling piece had a snap-on lock.
That's why I thought it was like a sawed-off, right? But wait a second. We don't have cavalry today. I don't think so. I see them as police officers. Like police officers here in the UK have, we have horsed police soldiers, not soldiers, but police officers. But and also in football games. But in war, I don't think they're as efficient anymore, are they? You have tanks now, you have like all of these other stuff, but they could still be useful for like mountainous areas, right? They could still be useful, but I don't think they are used anymore. It's just mechanical. You have mechanical cavalry, but in tough terrain, I think it could be useful where cars can't go, where tanks can't go, right? But I don't know. I haven't seen much of cavalry like being used in a military scenario as it used to be.
They had a small bore of 8 to 10 millimeters, whereas a typical musket had 19 millimeters. However, the fowling piece had a snap-ons lock, a sort of flintlock, and were usually rifled, giving them peerless accuracy. Rifled firearms were an uncommon sight before the Industrial Revolution.
Yeah, at one point we're only going to have
units
drones.
Were also raised outside of Finland.
No more soldiers.
Gustavus's first lifeguard of cuirassiers contained many Livonians, modern-day Latvians, and was commanded by Jörgen Adrikas. Another Livonian company was commanded by Fabian Aderkas. The old allotment system was especially popular in Finland, where many farmers chose to pay their taxes by supplying the crown with a rider and equipment. For hundreds of years, Finland had been located on the hotly contested and constantly shifting border with Russia. Reports from these frontline conflicts mentions that the Finns and the Sami are sometimes using the bow and arrow, and they were excellent archers.
Even today, Finland is at risk
skis and were devastating guerrilla fighters against the Russians and Poles. Some said that they had magical powers and could bewitch the enemy. They frequently engaged in cattle rustling, and their horses were greatly improved through the infusion of Eastern blood.
Oh wait, what?
Almost half of the national cavalry came from Finland, and they were known for being especially ferocious. Their war cry was HAKKA PÄLLE, meaning hack 'em down.
HAKKA PÄLLE!
The imperial troops would nickname them Hakkapellites.
Now that was a jump scare. This whole video, the narrator is very calm, telling you a story.
Finland,
and then
they were
suddenly
known for being especially ferocious. Their war cry was HAKKA PÄLLE, meaning hack 'em down.
Suddenly.
The imperial troops would nickname them Hakkapellites. Today, this unit has become iconic and appears in video games like Civilization and Total War. Contemporary witnesses weren't so positive. German clerics prayed that God would save them from the Agmen Horribili Hakkapellitorum, the terrifying march of the Hakkapellites.
I like how
the Hakkapellites were known.
The narrator, how whenever he changes languages, he sounds different. So in English, he's very calm, and then when he goes into Swedish, he's like Agmen Horribili Hakkapellitorum. It sounds like he's casting an elvish spell. Oh man.
The Hakkapellites were known for their brutality. Scotsman James Turner wrote that a great many killed in cold blood by the Finns, who professed to give no quarter. Other times, the Finnish cavalry found other ways to enjoy themselves in the enemy territory. They found the southern food much to their liking, compared to the more Spartan diet of the north. A Swedish diplomat wrote that our Finnish boys may not return home to Savolax anytime soon. In Livonia, they were forced to feed on moldy bread with their beer soup. In Bavaria, they make cold soup in their helmets, with wine and puff pastry. Many of the cavalry commanders were Finns as well. Colonel Torsten Stålhandske was probably the most prominent. His name literally means steel glove. The Battle of Breitenfeld was decided after he led his Finnish cavalry in a massive charge and smashed the Imperials' left flank. In 1634, he became Major General of all national cavalry in Germany. Åke Tott was an ordinary man from a long line of Finnish warriors. Already at the age of 15, he joined the war against Russia. In 1626, he rose to the command of a Finnish cuirassier regiment. Because his name means death in German, he chose his terrifying banner to be a death's head against a black field. His cavalry carried 6 variations of it.
Kind of terrifying.
For his glories against the Polish, he was personally knighted by Gustavus Adolphus, and in the 30 Years' War he rose to the rank of Marshal and Royal Councillor. Gustavus himself referred to him as the Finnish snowplow. I could really dedicate an entire video to his astounding career, but sadly we don't have the time. A video on this sadly obscure cavalry commander probably wouldn't garner enough clicks, so I don't think I'll ever make it.
Oh,
but
see,
not all of the cavalry.
Now that's something that I always say on the channel. Guys, if you are interested, go support him, because you can't, like, he said the story about this guy won't get enough clicks, so maybe that will never happen. So go support him on Patreon and tell him we want you to do that story, and then he'll probably do it, because sometimes we only need that push, right? And that's the thing about YouTube algorithm, man.
All of the cavalry commanders were Finnish, or even Swedish. Franz Bernhard von Thurn was a Bohemian nobleman who had led the Protestant revolt against the emperor back in 1618. This was the uprising which escalated into the 30 Years' War. Having been forced to flee his home, he now found a place as a commander of the Finnish cavalry. This is further evidence that the 30 Years' War wasn't just a German, but a wider European conflict. He successfully led the cavalry to victory at the Battle of Wallhof in 1626. Swedish infantrymen and cavalry worked closely together to defeat the Poles. This was not only the bloody baptize of the Swedish cavalry, but Gustavus' first great victory. It must have been comical to see the tall Swedes and Finns mounted atop their short and fat horses. As soon as they landed in Poland and Germany, they made attempts to buy better mounts. But at the Battle of Breitenfeld in 1631, Imperial General Tilly pointed out that the Swedish cavalry were so badly mounted that our baggage boys had better horses than them. Gustavus didn't exactly like that, and kicked Tilly's butt during the battle. With the open fields of central Germany now unlocked, the king could acquire new and excellent horses. He always gave preferential treatment to his national cavalry. In the summer of 1632, mercenary horses starved in the stables, because Gustavus wouldn't give them sufficient fodder over his own troops.
What?
The main weapon of the cavalryman was the wheellock pistol. It was expensive to produce, but was more accurate than alternatives, and had a very low chance of misfire.
It's beautiful.
They were loaded with 1 or 2 bullets, shotgun pellets, or a rectangular bullet called a slug.
Slug.
Cavalry units had previously used a tactic called caracole, where they rode up close to the enemy, discharged their pistols, then rode off to reload.
It's like a drive-by shooting.
Gustavus and the German princes had abandoned the caracole.
So what he mentioned that, like, have you ever seen Mel Gibson's The Patriot? That kind of like, I've seen them do that. They go close, shoot, and then they turn around and go back. This is very interesting. Like when he's telling the story here, his narration, I paint a picture in my mind, like I imagine like a movie going in my mind. So it's pretty nice. I mean, as a movie and imaginary perspective, not as a history perspective, because, you know, war is always horrible.
The Gustavian cavalry rode close, discharged their pistols, then drew their swords and waded into melee. The hard handle of the pistol could be used as a club. They also used a long-barreled pistol with a musket stock called kortgevär, roughly meaning short musket. However, there was a shortage. A
good strategy would be go in waves. Go, shoot, while the other one comes, shoot, you go back, you know, in waves. That maybe that's the strategy they used, right?
Of pistols amongst the Swedish cavalry. Some historians believe this to be the reason why Gustavus abandoned the caracole in favor of a more melee-centric Polish tactic. Their principal arm became the sword. They were distinguished by their S-shaped quillon. It became known as the Swedish sword, even though most were imported from the Netherlands. Since the Imperial cavalry were so heavily armored, Gustavus instructed his horsemen to perform a special strike to kill the enemy horse. Swedish cavalrymen were supposed to wear a back and breastplate, but many chose not to wear armor at all. Most engagements were skirmishes, which required maximum mobility. There was also a constant issue of supplying armor. Also, note that the armor of this period was seldom shiny and blank. It had been treated with acid and was black. Imperial cuirassiers plated in all black armor must have looked terrifying.
Yeah, like I was thinking of that. It must be very, very terrifying. Imagine being the first person shot. Like you're used to fighting a war in a specific way, and then you go there and then somebody pulls out a something that nobody has ever seen before. You like a mechanism, and then you don't even know what hit you. A loud bang. Can you imagine how terrifying that is? Like the first time they saw a gun, I would imagine they were like, what the heck is this weapon? What are they using? And like, all hope is gone after that.
It's been suggested that leather buff coats were used by the Swedish cavalry, since they were otherwise popular during the 30 Years' War.
They probably had spies, though. They
Gustavus himself
probably
wore one,
weren't
made from moose leather.
caught off
Most
guard,
Swedish
right?
cavalrymen dressed only in their clothes. Each regiment of horse produced their own riding jackets, and they wore the same color. For example, the Western Geats had yellow and blue coats. The Eastern Geats had yellow coats, and the Uplanders had yellow and black. However, unlike the infantry, sightings in the field of uniformed cavalry are extremely rare. If the cavalry received uniforms, they either mixed them with non-uniform garments, or the uniforms must have been of an unremarkable color like grey. Some cavalry regiments were known by a color, such as the Red Regiment of Horse, but this referred only to flag colors. Each company of a cavalry regiment had its own standard, which by the late 1620s was called a cornet. It was made from a patterned damask silk and carried on a fluted lance.
A dog too?
I keep saying this in every video, but Gustavus' best trait was his use of cooperation, in every facet from the civilian to the military. His battlefield tactics revolved around combined arms. The cavalry worked closely together with the infantry. They relied on a musket salvo to soften up the enemy, before delivering their brutal charge. At the Battle of Grozno in 1629, the Swedish cavalry proved that it was able to defeat their Polish counterparts. However, in Germany, their abilities have been much exaggerated. The small Swedish horses were outclassed by the fearsome imperial cuirassiers. Gustavus feared the cuirassiers. Before Breitenfeld, he ordered Stål Hanske to "Charge me those black fellows soundly, for they are the men that will undo us." Even when supported by infantry firepower, the Gustavian cavalry could fall flat. At Lützen they took a hammering, and one Englishman wrote, "Had not our foot stood like a wall, there had not a man of us come off alive. Our horse did but poorly." Without the firepower, they would probably have stood no chance at all.
I must say, I love the Old English. It is very charming the way they speak.
The Gustavian cavalry was a flexible cavalry unit. It could carry out reconnaissance and win victories on the battlefield. But tactically, it was beaten by more specialized cavalry and was dependent on the support of infantry musketeers.
So cannons came before handguns. It makes sense because normally things they are developed in a bigger scale, like computers, huge computers, and then they find a way to make it smaller and smaller. Now, when cannons came along, that must have been even crazier. But it feels like people would have been like, wow, they have a portable cannon.
A single unit of Gustavus' army carried the day. It was cooperation between his units, combined arms, which won the day. This was very much in line with Swedish society as a whole. The estates worked together to gather their meager resources and do something with them. Compare that to the Polish army and society. The army was carried by its hussars. When they were defeated, the poor infantry couldn't do much. In a similar fashion, Polish society was never able to truly get together and cooperate and centralize.
Very interesting.
If you enjoy the content I produce, consider supporting me monetarily on Patreon. You'll find the link in the video description. Otherwise, please give the video a like and a comment, so that YouTube will show it to more potential viewers.
That's how
and why
YouTube
not share it
works.
with a friend? Cheers.
Okay, so a very interesting video and educational about the army of Gustavus Adolphus. With the charge phrase, HAKKA PÄLLE. I hope I'm saying that correctly. What an interesting piece of history here. I'm looking at the description here. When Gustavus Adolphus became king, he had been left with a very bad army. If he wanted to beat up the Poles and their hussars, he needed a much better cavalry force. That's very, very... My distant ancestor, Johan Galle, in Finland, was a lieutenant general of the Finnish cavalry. What? I'm reading the chat here. We're live now. He died at the Battle of Lund while saving the Swedish king. That is amazing. Wow. Can you imagine having like an ancestor having done that? Such a a proud moment in family history. Pretty awesome to know that. And thank you so much, Klaus, for sharing this with me. I can see how this is very important to you as well. The history, since your ancestor is, one of the, the lieutenant generals of the Finnish cavalry. That's pretty cool. How did you find out? Like, how did you find out about that? It must be something that is like spoken about in your family, right? From generations. That's pretty awesome to know that your family was like that. One day I will also like kind of like go and find out where my family came from. I know part of it, but not distant ancestors. But I would like to know their story. I think everyone would, right? It's an interesting thing to do. But yeah, great video, very educational, and gives us a little bit of insight about the cavalry, their importance, and how the infantry and the handgun, not handgun, but the pistol also made a difference during their battles. I saw this is also a video that was recorded in Turku, I think. So that's pretty cool. Thank you for sharing that. And with that said, I will see you guys in the next video. If you want to request a video through Buy Me a Coffee or Coffee, link is in the pinned comments, and click over here to see more of my educational videos. Thank you guys so much. I hope you enjoyed the reaction. Take care. Bye-bye.